the traditional system is broken. If we consider that the purpose is to get an A on this paper so that you can get your degree, so that you can graduate, that's actually not the purpose. What LLMs have done is essentially created a cheat code. It's divorced the output from any sort of meaningful reflection of what you have in fact learned along the way. And so in a fascinating way, also put in the spotlight what is the purpose of education.
Hello, we're at WISE 12 Summit. My name is Sam Meekings. I'm an associate professor of creative writing at Northwestern University in Qatar. And I'm here talking to Dr. Spencer Stryker, professor of digital media design at Northwestern University in Qatar. We're going to be talking about the role of AI in education today. So I wanted to jump straight in by talking about this term that's in the zeitgeist at the moment, this concept of cognitive debt, this idea that AI is great in the short term for doing all those tasks and jobs that we don't have the time to do or we don't really want to do, but that there's going to be a price to pay somewhere down the road. What's your take on that?
So what's my take on that? I can start by talking about the famous study. So for the new podcast that we launched called Rendered by Robots, we interviewed Natalia Kuzmina, who is the researcher at MIT Media Lab, and she's the author of the study Your Brain on ChatGPT. So I have my own opinions, but before we get to those, I'll just kind of recap the study. And she essentially used a various control groups. She had some students do writing the essay in a traditional way. Others used LLMs and generative AI to facilitate some parts of it, but they still did a lot of it on their own, and others more or less used LLMs and generative AI for the whole thing. And what she was able to do and isolate was pretty much, I think, what we've all kind of noticed intuitively, which is that if you rely very heavily on LLMs to do the heavy lifting, to outsource the hard parts of the critical thinking, in her study, afterwards, the students recalled a remarkably small amount of the material. And there's also a loss of ownership in the sense that you're looking at this thing that was generated 90% by ChatGPT, and it looks like it was written by someone else, and you feel no sense of ownership of it, or very, very little sense of ownership of it.
You feel nothing at all, really, right? You don't get any pride or satisfaction or any of the kind of emotional payoffs that you would when you're doing a decent job or when you're putting in your own.
Yeah, exactly. So her study kind of put some scientific backing to something that you and I as professional educators already observe in the classroom, and something that even myself in using generative AI tools have also observed. But as you say, there can be this kind of distance from the output because you have not put enough mental horsepower, energy into the creating of it. So it's a noticeable phenomenon. Now, the concept of cognitive debt, which Natalia Kuzmina coined in her paper, is a very interesting term. What it basically means is that if you outsource the hard parts of critical thinking to an LLM once, twice, 3 times, you keep doing it over and over and over, you basically start to sort of degrade your critical thinking skill over time, leading inevitably toward you might say, cognitive bankruptcy.
Yeah, those muscles that we're supposed to practice using and develop, especially in the higher education context, begin to atrophy, essentially. Right. You're not using the ones you should be using or ought to be using in order to learn, to develop, to grow.
I think it's pretty intuitive. I mean, if you think about it like this, going to the gym hurts, right? It's actually like creating an ancestral environment for oneself that is intentionally painful, right? It's easier to not go to the gym. You go to the gym and you inflict micro doses of pain on yourself because on the other side of it, you become stronger and fitter and so on and so forth. The same thing is true of doing difficult cognitive tasks. You do them, they hurt, but on the other side of it, you have an increased cognitive capability. So that's the issue that her paper really, I think, zeroes in on. And again, it's a fairly intuitive concept.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense, especially with that gym analogy, that somewhere down the line, there's going to be pain. There's going to be trade-off. You can either have the pain now, and it's going to be useful because it forces you to practice, or the pain comes later on when you realize, wait, I've de-skilled myself at something by not practicing it earlier and going for the shortcut, essentially.
Right. So then what we could jump into is the concept of assessment. So this traditional assessments have been designed in a world in which getting from nothing to the final output, to the assessment, requires, there's no shortcut to it until, let's say, the rise to the release of ChatGPT in November of 2022 or whatever. Until then, we could reasonably assume if you wrote a 25-page paper from scratch as, let's say, a sophomore in college, that you learned something along the way. You cannot get to that output without having to suffer, let's say, through a lot of difficult cognitive challenges and moments of critical thinking. And so what LLMs have done is essentially created a quote-unquote cheat code. In other words, it's divorced the output from any sort of meaningful reflection of what you have, in fact, learned along the way. And so in a fascinating way, it's also put in the spotlight what is the purpose of education.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's so many conversations around AI are coming back in education, are coming back to this central concept, which is we learn more through the process than just by creating the product. And if the product, as you say, is relatively easy to create with a short set of prompts, then where's the process? Where's the learning process? Where's the journey?
And that's it. The journey is everything. The journey is why you're here. So that's what I think is the most interesting kind of philosophical, educationally philosophical concept to come out of this, is that now we can see more clearly, why are you here? You're actually here to create, and this is going back to this newly famous essay by Clay Shirky that came in the New York Times, that was published in the New York Times recently, to effect changes to your long-term memory. Back to the gym analogy. In other words, you're changing your brain. You have this hardware and you're upgrading your software, right? So in fact, the output is meaningless. To create a 25-page paper for ChatGPT is a trivial task. It's too easy, right? So that, again, that's divorced from any meaningful reflection of your cognitive journey in that sense. And so now we have to ask ourselves, okay, if the purpose of education is to create beneficial changes to your long-term memory, now we have to find a way to achieve that.
Yeah, it's a question of what's the role of education in terms of metacognition,
right? Essentially. And the metacognitive part is very interesting. Trying to talk about that in the classroom with undergrads is, it's a pretty high level, highfalutin conversation to have, but it's also an essential conversation. So in other words, you're asking young people to just take a step back from the game that they're playing and ask yourself, what is really the purpose here? So you are, in fact, trying to become smarter. Let's put it another way, you're trying to build competencies. So when the semester started, you knew this, and by the end of the semester, you know this. Or you could do this, and now you can do this. So we're asking you, in a way, to reflect on your cognitive journey or the purpose of your own intentionality of your own educational kind of journey. It's difficult, but it's also, I think, become very important for us to try to teach now, to get undergrads thinking that way. Why? Because, again, it's broken. The traditional system is broken. If we consider it the other way around, that the purpose is to get an A on this paper, so that you can get your degree, so that you can graduate, that's actually not the purpose. And we learned that from game-based learning as well, that, in fact, we've lost sight of it. We're looking at the extrinsic motivations, the MacGuffins, and losing sight of essentially the true goal.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's also an element where those conversations are difficult to have because it's really hard to encourage that kind of long-term thinking in the current situations many students find themselves in. They may be able to say philosophically, theoretically, yes, I'm not going to use AI because I'm worried what it's going to do for my metacognition and the effects of that cognitive debt are, what the ethical implications are, but I got a paper due at 11:59 p.m. tonight, and I've got to do this, and I can't possibly get all these readings done, and I'm worried about this. And so it becomes a kind of short-term solution, or there becomes a kind of divorce from the big picture goals, as you say, the kind of highfalutin stuff, the purpose of higher education, and the short-term, okay, how do I get through this semester, or this week, or how do I get to graduation and then get out into the world? How do we encourage those conversations? Do you have any sense? We've talked before, you and I, about trying to get students to see education as an investment in themselves.
Right.
How might we do that? Do you have any thoughts?
All right, yeah, so that's another, well, you bring up an important point, which is you can have it's kind of like the gym analogy too. You can have an idealistic vision. The same thing even with your Netflix queue. There's a phenomenon where people's backlog of their Netflix queues is all these like heady, like foreign films that they'd like to watch. But then the things that they actually watch are like the popcorn flicks, right?
Absolutely.
It's just human nature. So we have to acknowledge the fact that when push comes to shove, when people are under pressure, they're going to default to the
easiest option.
To the easiest option. So the pressure then becomes, I think, back to the faculty member to create new types of assessment, rethink assessment, competency-based assessment. So that means, in other words, how can we, before the semester started, you could do this. At the end of the semester, you can do that. How do we actually prove that? It's not going to be the paper. It's got to be some other form of assessment. I think project-based assessment is a good one. So in my case, if we're doing design education, in my case, it's actually not that easy to hack. Let's say if you're going to make a complicated, let's say, AI-powered docudrama, AI-animated docudrama, there is actually no quick way to do that if you're going to using the current tools to do original character design, to then, let's say using Midjourney, to create multiple angles on that character using, let's say, the newest tool, Nano Banana. I want a close-up, extreme close-up, side shot, all without breaking the character model. My students are nodding because they know it's not easy to do. Then to use the latest video tools to animate them, and then to get the animations that are actually, the physics are correct. You could get an animation that's not good to get an animation that is good. Then to, let's say, get good sound design, good music. Let's say you want them to talk, then you have to do a lip sync. It has to be credible. Again, you want the camera to change during the lip sync. In other words, that is from a design, that's my specialty from a design education point of view. The more kind of layers of complexity that you fold into it, then essentially there is no way to cheat that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. On the flip side is my experience as a writing professor, where it is relatively easy with a bit of nuance and a bit of practice, again, to kind of cheat the system, essentially, and generate a 1,000-page essay or a 2,000-word memoir. And the issue becomes, I think, right now, it's relatively easy for me to spot. That will change rapidly, probably already is. But what can be spotted is those papers that don't quite fit with the others, where the students have the ability to generate via ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever they're using an interesting paper, and yet it doesn't fulfill the criteria because they haven't quite got that analytical awareness of what a good paper looks like.
Right.
And you and I know that those kind of skills, being able to analyze a bit of writing or a game or a piece of design and say, yes, this is fit for purpose, this works well because of A, B, and C, because it fulfills this criteria, that's something we learn through many, many, many countless hours. And that's expertise, really. Hours of practice and going through things. If students lose those practice, then they lose that analytical ability to say, okay, yes, this was designed by ChatGPT, which isn't a problem in and of itself, but is it fit for purpose? Does it fulfill this brief? Is it fit for this class in industry? Is it fit for this purpose? Is it going to work with what my job is requiring, what my boss has asked for, what is, company has paid for?
Exactly. So we get into the concept of taste. But for 1 second there, let's just talk about this idea of two things can be true at once. So there is a contradiction in the sense that on the one hand, you need to still do things the hard way. There's this whole idea of let's go back to blue books. Let's have students sit down and grind out handwritten exams for 3 hours. Why? Because that's the only way for them to develop those cognitive skills. Again, if we consider us as cyborgs connected to these enhanced, augmentations, these technical augmentations, that's the only way we can be sure that the organic side, has learned this thing truly by isolating it as a variable. But then the problem with that is that that's not the world that we live in. So that's the counter argument is Clay Shirky, and again, his argument's more nuanced than this, but in his essay in New York Times where he talks about going back to the Middle Ages, I've heard pushback from other people we've interviewed saying, yeah, but the Middle Ages weren't that great, actually.
Absolutely.
And it's like, that's true, too. The Middle Ages weren't necessarily perfect. And his point being, though, that oral exams, rhetoric, being, just the human being able to do things is this vital skill. Okay, so then the pushback, the balance is, yes, that's not the world we live in. And in fact, the job market or the world that our students are going into is one that is influenced by generative AI and will be continuously influenced more and more so. So in that sense, you need to be able to do both. So we can look at it as a thing where on the one hand, now you have to be able to do the oral exam, the long-form blue book exam, and on the other hand, you have to show us that you can integrate 5 different AI tools systematically. So I think in a sense, it's not an either or thing. It's more of like a balance thing.
Yeah, and I think there are some really interesting opportunities there. I mean, I don't know about you, but I would imagine your experience was probably a bit similar to mine. When I was an undergraduate, I do not recall at any stage in any course I took, any professor ever stopping to explain why we did what we did.
Right,
it was simply a case of,
Presumed.
Okay, this week you've got to do an essay, next week you've got to do a lit review, the week after that, research paper, and then we've got a final exam. Why do we do them? Well, that's what the course requires. That's how we pass. And then we pass, and then we get the degree, and we can go out into the world.
Yeah.
Here, of course, I think the onus is on us to explain, well, why are we doing these assignments? What are the skills that can be learned via those assignments? How are those going to be useful, both for us in terms of skill development, in terms of personal, intellectual development, and of course in relation to potential jobs and careers later on.
Absolutely. Let's talk about AI slop and the AI slopification of the web. So the thing I've heard recently that either now or in the near future, most 50% or more of the text that's available on the internet will in fact be generative, AI generated text. And then you look at TikTok, YouTube Shorts, YouTube, everywhere you look, you're seeing this degradation, this really bad video content. So what is that? AI slop is basically people who have access to tools that previously there was a delta where it was impossible to make. Even a mediocre movie was impossible to make without certain level of skills.
Absolutely.
But now anybody can make mediocrity basically effortlessly, and then that's created this flood of AI slop. what is the antidote to AI slop, and that's basically what we're teaching in design education when done properly, is taste. Right. So now more so than ever in human history, we can make so much media. You can create so many images, so much video in any style you could possibly imagine. So what is the implication of that? The implication is that you actually have to impose a kind of false scarcity. You have to teach constraints, because great design actually is about constraints. It's not like if you look at a great film does not have 5 different unique styles in the course of 90 minutes. It has one beautiful style that's developed and paid off throughout the whole thing. And a game, the same thing. Games don't suddenly change styles in the middle or have 7 different styles in the course of 90 minutes of playing the game, and so on and so forth. So basically, that's taste. And that's a really tough skill to teach, but I think it's also incredibly important. Again, from media and design education perspective, how do I know this piece is good and this piece is AI slop? We have to teach that skill.
And part of it is to do with experience, right? You have to have a knowledge of other games,
right?
Or to flip it to my world,
exactly.
You can't write without reading, without having experience of different texts. Yes. There's no way to judge whether a text is good or what it's doing. It's fit for purpose. I think that brings us back, what you're saying, to the idea of being intentional, being purposeful, to have something that fits with your taste,
right?
Some kind of developed aesthetic.
Yeah.
You need to have a sense of what you, as an individual, want to express.
Right.
You know, there has to be an aspect where you're not thinking, I'm going to create something that's identical to what everyone else creates. I'm going to create another piece of brain rot because, you know, the internet is desperate for a little bit more of that. You're thinking, what can I do that only I can do? What can I express that is unique to my experience as a human being alive in 2025?
Absolutely.
How do we focus again or recenter the human in the humanities, if you like?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. It comes back to, again, something from my interview with Clay Shirky that he mentioned, which I thought was really good. In addition to the long-term memory take, is this idea that higher education, if you strip back everything, is about identity formation. Really. Again, like you come in as this 17 or 18-year-old person, and you change a lot in the course of those 4 years or so that you're in your university experience. Your identity is changing, and ideally you're becoming a deeper, a more profound, a more thoughtful, a more soulful person with much more understanding of the world, of styles, of literature, of art, history, and all those sorts of things, as well as competencies. So that's a big one, is that we need to kind of center, I think, this concept of identity formation. Again, getting away from this idea that I'm here to get an A so that I can get a degree, so that I can get out of here.
Exercise.
What's that?
The box ticking exercise.
It's a box ticking exercise. And then back to the style piece, that's part of it, I think. Again, from a creative perspective, if you want to create a great movie or a great game, most of the time the great art directors, creative directors are very literate in different styles and different types of aesthetics. They know why certain compositions are good. They can tell the difference between, let's say, Francis Ford Coppola's approach to Apocalypse Now. Name the great director. Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein just launched on Netflix. When you watch that movie, you know that you're watching a film by a great filmmaker. You can just tell it's different. Every single frame, you could pause it, and you could say there's something special about this composition.
A unique fingerprint, essentially.
Exactly. The color, everything is very intentional. The colors, the costumes, the characters, the composition, just so much going on, and then that is the difference between being average or mediocre and being amazing. Why? Obviously, Del Toro is a incredibly intelligent and gifted filmmaker, but he's also a student of cinema, right? He is a person who has watched a lot of films critically and is doing things intentionally, taking the best of movies that he's seen, synthesizing them algorithmically in his brain algorithm, his creative algorithm running in his organic brain, and he is outputting great ideas. So that's a kind of fluency of understanding art, understanding film, and only by going deep into those things can you have ultimately quickly come to great decisions, I think.
I think you're right, and it speaks also to this idea of AI enabling a kind of great upscaling, whereby now anybody can write a half-decent bit of copy, or a half-decent essay, or a half-decent proposal, let's say. What happens in this situation? Well, if you were struggling before, that's great for you. If you were averaging before and just managing, it's terrible for you. But it's also an opportunity, because in a world where anyone can do that, how are you going to do something a little bit different, a little bit unique, maybe to the level of Del Toro, maybe not.
Right, he's elite level, but you can learn from the best.
Absolutely, yeah. How are you going to put your personal imprint on something, make it stand out when everything else may sound a little similar in a world of AI?
So essentially, generative AI has put pressure on mediocrity. Basically, mediocrity has become obsolete.
Yeah.
At least as something that anyone's going to pay you for. So if you think about a game studio, if you are a mediocre concept artist in a game studio, it's just not going to work anymore. The same thing with being an engineer. It's the same thing with being a designer. Why? Because LLMs, generative image tools, coding platforms are too good at producing basic stuff that's passable. So yes, there's an upscaling in the sense that I think going into the modern job market, there's going to be a lot of pressure on young people, or really anybody at any skill level, but particularly at the entry level to be able to do something better than a generic LLM outputs or generic. Let's put it this way: you need to be able to distinguish yourself from the tool and make it really clear that you have a unique value add. You could be very, very good at using the tool, right?
Of course.
And that can be a skill too, but being very, very good at using the tool is not just writing prompts. It comes back to this idea of being extremely literate about, again, art history, film history, literature, history, storytelling.
The foundational knowledges.
Foundational concepts. So to your point about the great upskilling and the pressure on the job market, that's the thing. And I know here's the other thing to keep in mind is that these tools are only getting better all the time. I launched a class in fall of 2023 called AI Tools for Digital Media Design. And since the first time ever in my career, when I was showing slides that I had developed in November of 2023, I was showing those slides in, I think, February of 2024, and I don't think that that's lazy. I had just written those slides.
Yeah.
And as I was showing those slides, I was saying to the students, oh, wait a second, no, this is no longer accurate.
Already.
Oh, wait a second, this is no longer accurate. Oh, wait a second, these slides are worthless.
They become obsolete.
These slides are obsolete, and they were 4 months old.
Wow.
So at the beginning of this semester, I was teaching Nano Banana for natural language image editing, which is an absolutely breakthrough technology. And so you're trying to understand what are the affordances and limitations of that particular tool. And then guess what? This week, Nano Banana 2 comes out. And so now everything that you thought was the limitation of the tool is no longer relevant.
Everything changes overnight.
It's completely different. And now I need to go in and learn everything about Nano Banana 2 so that I can completely reset my understanding of what's possible or not possible. That's the situation we're living in, which actually means you don't have to be a super genius to appreciate that in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, it's going to continue this process. So you as a creative person just need to be very flexible, improvisational, opportunistic in terms of grokking these tools and making the most out of them.
Absolutely. You have to be committed essentially to lifelong learning. It's something we always talk about in the world of education, but it's something that we can see a real and vivid example of in AI tools. You may have mastered one of them, the next one comes out, you've got to master that all over again. There's a continual adapting. And part of our job is surely to teach that adaptability with those foundational skills and knowledges you talked about, but also, how do you adapt? How do you roll with the punches? How do you change and adapt? Use your skill sets with new set of tools that may come out next year or the year after.
Oh yeah, 100%. And then just being also strategic as well in terms of, again, building a creative career. So on the one hand, I think this is the absolute most exciting time ever to be doing creative production. It's never before been possible to do things like this. I am building an AI-powered animated docudrama from scratch by myself with a very, very small team. So it's an absolutely unbelievable time to be doing creative work. At the same time, it's deeply unsettling and unnerving, the breakneck pace of change as another theme. So those two things are kind of in counterbalance. So another thing I would think about as a creative person is, okay, if you were coming up 10 years ago, 15 years ago, many people that I know I went in my master's program at Indiana University in new media production and design, went on to get great careers in Silicon Valley and in different professional settings by mastering particular tools, like being amazing at Photoshop, amazing at Illustrator, amazing at Cinema 4D or After Effects. And I know people that they would just blow you away with what they can do with those tools.
They'd be the expert in one small niche, essentially.
One specific narrow niche, and a game company, a film company would be looking for a person who knows that skill, and they would get hired like that, right? Because they could bring this incredible value. That's changing right before our eyes. So right now I would not recommend to someone coming up in design and media to focus narrowly on one particular tool. I would not recommend that. Why? Because of what I mentioned. The capabilities of generative AI tools for creative production are just continuously innovating and one-upping themselves at such an incredible pace that you don't really know where the frontier is. And I think actually it's only going to get more and more capable.
Of course. And that essentially brings us full circle, really. We come back to this central idea that students need to take advantage of all the possible learning and knowledges out there, to be generalists, to draw on, as you say, literature, history, design, and everything, to explore this, wonderful, exciting, and also slightly scary frontier of the future. Thank you very much for talking to me, Dr. Spencer Stryker.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much, Sam Meekings.